TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Kevin Hinks. Kevin, let's take a look at the markets real quick here, because we're still deep in the red. The Dow Jones Industrial Average outperforming a little bit. We've got a little bit of flow into some of those staples in that specific index. The S&P 500 down 1.1% off of session lows. Dow Jones Industrial Average only down 1/3 of 1%. NASDAQ 100 down 2.2%, and the Russell 2000 down just under 2% on the day. So seeing red across the board. The roller coaster continues. But, Kev, let's bring in our next guest, and that's Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio.com. Thanks for joining us, Megan. We're talking about music today. I love this topic. Spotify shares are down about 28% this year, off all-time highs. This stock hit 387 last February, but down about 25% over the last month. What kind of data are you seeing in Spotify? Because it hasn't been a good year for this stock.
Yeah, so this is actually a really fun one today. And the reason that we brought it is because earlier this week, we actually saw a really high increase in volume across our system. Now, this was so high that our lead developer, he came to me and he said, hey, something's going on. Our consumption rates have doubled over the last few hours consistently. Like, should we check on something? Is something wrong? And when we really started digging into it to see, okay, what's driving this increased activity, it was Spotify. And it was because Spotify just released their annual Wrapped campaign. And so while this might seem silly to some people thinking about, okay, who are my top artists? Who are the top songs that I listened to over the last year? The fact that more than 500,000 consumers were talking about this year-end Wrapped campaign just organically is really significant. This was actually the largest single spike date for Spotify that we've ever recorded. You can see these mentions. We looked at this campaign over the last few years, and these mentions were up about 51% year over year. And so overall, this really just diverted our attention to the company Spotify for us to start to take a look and say, okay, what's going on here? And when we started digging in, we see, the last report that they had was actually a really strong report. The active listeners were growing about 20% year over year. The revenue increased by about 27% year over year. But then more importantly, what's really driving a lot of that revenue is they're having a really successful ad business. So that ad revenue increased by about 75% year over year. So this is one of those things where we're actually starting to see a little bit of a divergence opportunity, because we're starting to see this demand build for Spotify. We're seeing this mention build for Spotify, and we're not necessarily seeing the same reaction from the market.
Megan, there it is. Your top songs of 2021.
Yes, I wanted to see that.
Cool feature. It is such a cool feature on Spotify to see the songs that you've listened to the most. And you know what it tells Kevin Hinks? Man, you listen to a lot of country music, son. And that is what my top 21 says. But it is so cool, because I had this on yesterday driving around going, really? I listened to that song a lot? Oh my gosh. And I can see why it is enormously popular because of what it does. It basically, if you listen to a lot of music, and I do, it really takes what you've done in the last year and makes you a playlist of your most popular songs. It is an unbelievably popular feature, and I can tell why that causes more attention to Spotify, because it's personal. Each person gets their own personal list of what they listen. It's amazing. And you put out the numbers in Spotify about their ad-supported and their premium and how they're still growing. Podcasts are growing exponentially. So, this company is doing all the right things. But Tom, valuation, right? Valuations are what's getting hit. Growth companies and their valuations are what's getting taken down a notch in this current market that we find ourselves in. But your top list, this thing is unbelievably popular, guys.
Yeah, and Megan, when you look at that data, some of the data that you have, I think one of the key things for Spotify is podcasts and the amount of ad revenue generation that they're seeing across the board and the market share that they're taking from other platforms. Now, is this their engine for growth, and that's what you're seeing the popularity in, according to your data?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely one area that Spotify has invested itself in. This is a priority that they've said, this is something that we want to do. We want to focus on all audio, not just music. We want to be podcasts. We want to be even books. And this chart, I think, is so cool because it shows the progress that they've made from 2019 to 2021. So we looked at a chunk of 90 days comparatively, and you can see that market share grab, that expansion. We have a lot of other smaller podcasts. If you think about SoundCloud, if you think about iHeartRadio, those fall in that other category that's pretty small and shrinking. And Apple Podcasts were really their other top competitor, at least according to our data. And you can see that Spotify is continuing to grow this pie. Whenever we look at overall mentions of consumers who are listening to podcasts, we do see that tempering a bit year over year. But for Spotify specifically, those mentions of listening to a podcast on Spotify have increased by about 7% year over year. So whenever you start to kind of line this up, you can understand why Spotify is trying to invest in podcasts, because they see that consumers who are listening to podcasts a lot of times are more engaged with these ads. I think that there's some data out that more than half of consumers who hear about a product on a podcast ad go up and actually Google the product or look up to learn more about the product. So I think that if you're an advertiser, this is a really good thing. And this is partially why Spotify is able to grow this advertising revenue, while a lot of other companies have struggled in that department, especially over the last few quarters after this Apple update.
And Megan, when you guys look at data, what's the audiobooks portion of their business? Is that one other area that they're going to be able to do, or are you seeing popularity according to your data on that? Or is it just something new that they just have to add to their, portfolio of offerings for consumers?
I think that this was a fairly recent acquisition. I'm not certain. I think that there are certain chapters and things like that you can get on Spotify, but this is an area that they're expanding into, and really just a mindset shift of, we're more than just listening to a song or listening to a playlist. We want to cover the audio gamut for consumers and be that spot. And I think one thing that is really helping them too is now Spotify is getting to know its consumers really well. Kevin talked about the personalization aspect of this campaign that they put out, and the fact that they're able to customize all of these playlists to each specific user. Your music taste and your podcast taste and even the books that you listen to, those tell a lot about a consumer. And if you're able to continuously, give good recommendations, I think that leads to an increase in happiness. And then that also leads to probably better targeted ads if you're on the advertising side of things. So I think that these are all really positive signs that we're watching for Spotify moving forward.
Kevin, did you have a follow-up question for Megan real quick?
Yeah, of course. So because since I forgot to ask you a question the last time, I think I'll try to ask you one this time. So when you look at these numbers, Megan, what is the number one thing that they are looking to in the future? Have they really shifted from music to podcasts? What's the fastest growing part of this company? Is it still music? What's bringing in those ad users as well as the premium users? What is it? I mean, you've got a chart here that says podcasts are really expanding. Is that the biggest driver of this company right now?
I think that if you were to ask investors would probably say that that's the area that they're most interested in, just because of that large ad revenue. But I think for Spotify, retention is key too. They want to move more of these free listeners into also these premium subscribers. And so I think that whenever we look at this long term for Spotify, they're doing really well with personalization. The biggest growth drivers are the Discover Weeklies, the Made for You, those types of mentions. Anything that is custom to a consumer, we see really high happiness with, and we see growth in that area. Just overall listening mentions, when we look, and you have to keep in mind, we're only capturing about probably a quarter of their total pot, because I think North America users comprise about 25% of their total listening audience, and that's really where our data shines. And so we see some tempering there. So we're not going to catch this global expansion I think that they're hitting on as well. But I think the key for Spotify is, keep user engaged. They're doing really well at personalization. That's critical. And then expanding these potential advertising streams with podcasts are definitely a way to do that. Yeah,
they grew their advertising revenue 75%. But Megan, real quick, top song that you've listened to over the last year on Spotify?
If I'm being honest, mine is really obscure, but I think it's because I love to travel. It's called Colorado. So you guys will have to check it out.
I know that song. I've heard it many times before. Check out Sly Withers in Jamestown, Oregon for your next list. Those are good ones. All right, Megan, thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys. You too.